So the metaphor here that we're going to start with is really setting that intention to break that glass, to break this set of ideas and images of who and what you are, how you should act, how you should live. Right? I'm not Jim Tolles. That's just a designation. It's a way you can find me and email me, and it goes to me. Right? That's just a label. It's like wearing this shirt. I can take this shirt off. So as you're sitting here, as you're breathing, as you're coming into this moment, notice where you're tight or you're rigid, where you're holding on. Notice where you have to be Pedro or Michelle or Virginia or Aaron or Sharon. All of you just kind of paying attention. What makes that up? It's just a couple of syllables, right? Some vowels and consonants put together and said in a certain way. It's important to take these few moments before I really start talking about the shadow to tune into who you think you are, because usually what that does is it says, I am this, which creates the shadow that says, I am not that. And so starting by seeing what this is, and this is good for your journal later on afterwards, because you don't have to have any answers right now. It's just moving your awareness there. Some of you have already done this, and so this is already easy. You're like, okay, so these are the things. I want to be a good person. I want to always be funny or humorous or always positive. This last one's horrible, because to always be positive means you have to rate everything. Like, this is positive, this is negative. This is a positive, this is negative. Getting up in the morning. This is a positive way to get up in the morning. This is a negative way to get up in the morning. That is the ego in its entirety. That's exhausting. And this is why so many people have trouble always being positive. If being happy is positive and being sad is not positive, then there's a death in the family. Grieving is natural. This is an arising, but some people get so caught up in like, well, I have to be positive about this. I have to be happy. You're being happy about losing your mother who you dearly love. It doesn't make sense. And this is why we're very careful about any sort of rules or guidelines we have in our lives, to see what they're really doing. So it's important to start to understand what your rules are, what your assumptions about yourself, about who you are. Success is another one. Well, I don't want to get too gender specific. For a lot of guys, success is in, the work world and, being in control and having a certain amount of power. Women are taking on a lot of these horrible traits as far as empowering women. Is also this kind of strange powerlessness that they're taking on that us men are actually trying to get rid of. the sense of I have to achieve these things and get trophies and get promotions and all that sort of stuff, which is just a new form of powerlessness, a new type of slavery. New old. It's always been there. So we look at these things as like, what am I trying to succeed at? Because we also don't want to bring that into the spiritual path, because now we're turning that into a goal. And enlightenment becomes a goal. Or moving through the transitionary period of enlightenment and awakening is a goal. And it keeps going. It's the same old mechanism, the same old assumption, which means there's success and failure. Sometimes in my sessions, I'll say, just assume you've already failed. Don't even worry about the success part. Just assume you've already failed. Just, let go through giving up in that sort of way. Which completely messes with an ego that's really like, I have to succeed at everything. So, no, just say you've already failed. Because it won't believe if you say you've already succeeded. Because that part of me never wants to have succeeded. And there can be a way where you kind of embrace that, say, like, I give up, I let go, and that sort of moment of failure where suddenly something can open up. And it's different for everyone. So it's just one of the many ways that I use that paradigm. So as you're thinking about your rules and your assumptions and the glass facade that you may be carrying around about, this is who I am. See if you can make space, as in the poem that I just read earlier that some of you were listening to me read, to let that break, to let yourself start to boil in your own love in this space, and this connection with all these amazing people from all around the world, across the United States. The shadow, very simply, is what we don't think we can be, or what we don't want to look at, what we've been avoiding, what we've been ignoring. So a lot of shadows contain things like anger, fear, sadness, guilt. Definitely trauma, because trauma tends to have all those all balled up into one. So sexual abuse, that's in a lot of shadows. I spend a lot of time working with people who have those issues, partially because the spiritual space is one of the few spaces that is willing to work with someone holistically. And partly because a lot of other spaces just don't make space for people to really be in that old trauma, and to release it, to know it, to see it with love, not with accusation. Right? So that gets stuck down there. Things we just forget and don't fit our ego stories get put over there. A lot of our greatest light gets put over there, which may seem kind of ironic, but it's true that there's this interesting way where false humility that we are taught, that we can't be this sort of great, grand, wonderful light being, says, no, I can't be this wonderful healer, listener, lover, whatever it is. There's all sorts of stuff that gets stuck over there, and it's usually under the layer of other shadow stuff. And so it can be quite messy. One of my students who's helping with my social media outreach, she's helping me with this newsletter I send out to people who want to share different blogs and whatnot. And the share that she's selected for this particular week was permission to be a hot mess in the spiritual path. It gets messy when we get into the shadow stuff. If you're looking for immediate clarity, sometimes it comes, but a lot of times it doesn't. Sometimes I use the metaphor of dredging up the bottom of a lake where all this silt and all this junk is just sunk down and it's just sitting there. Or I use the metaphor of, old, rotted, wet wood. When you start to burn it, that thing makes the most ungodly smoke and smell. And it's just like everything gets black and sooty and you just can't see anything. And as we're talking, keep coming back to your breath. Bring the breath a little bit deeper. I really want you to sit down inside yourself. Really set that intention to see all of yourself as we're talking, because that's going to inform some of the questions you ask about shadow stuff later on. If you're still caught up in the glass projection, this hard shell, and you haven't broken it, that's where your questions will come from. And if they come from there, that's fine too. Right? There's no wrong way to do this. So if some of the shadow starts to kick up for some of you as I'm talking, it's like, I don't think I'm doing it right the way he's saying it, then you've already started to notice the shadow. So in this interesting way, you've already started to succeed. Right? Even that thing that's worried about failure is revealing to yourself part of the shadow. Welcome silence into your life. Because a lot of times to start to see these other parts of ourselves, we need to slow down, to soften, to let the water clear enough to see the junk sitting at the bottom of the lake. And don't expect this to be an easy thing, but don't expect it to be a hard thing. It's this interesting mix where on the one hand, we don't want to turn this whole shadow work thing into this long, drawn-out ordeal, right? The ego wants a long, drawn-out ordeal and wants 19 types of techniques. At the same time, we live in a culture that's very much, give me a pill and make it all better today. And this is not life. We can let go in any given instant. We can. So usually what happens is we have to look at how are we committed to these different things? How are we committed to hiding? People spend a lot of energy trying to try to hide fear from other people, hide their anger, hide their shame. And that's what shame likes to do. It's like the 500-pound monkey that just buries everything. And getting that thing to move can be just absolutely atrocious. I definitely have plenty of sessions where I'm talking to people and I'll say the same thing over for months, but the shame is so heavy that it just sits there on top of the core issue, and the person just feels overwhelmed by it. To continue the monkey metaphor, until this person has gotten to their 100th monkey of somebody telling them that, or them having the realization, and kind of builds up enough of that energy. They've been cooking enough of their own love, as well as a certain level of dissatisfaction in a good way, that says, no, I don't want this huge gorilla sitting there like squashing me anymore. I want to get this out. Then nothing will move, because this is where our own inner commitment is so important, to turning inwards, to start to find these shadowy aspects of ourselves, see what they're hiding, see why they're there. Why can't you be angry? What does anger mean to you? Right, and this isn't getting lost in the emotions, because some of you do that. Some of you want to just kind of get lost in the drama of the emotions, because that's part of that ego structure that other people have. And so with that, the shadow becomes, why are you afraid of standing in a firmer place, standing in, I don't want to use control, but a stronger sense of guidance. Control I usually associate with the ego, where the ego is always trying to make things happen. Welcome, Cynthia. Welcome, Jackie. We're immersed in the shadow already. So you really want to look at this part of yourself to say, why do I like being out of control? What am I afraid of inside me that I don't even want to make decisions for myself? And that there can be that fear of right or wrong again, fear of reprisals from other people for whatever reason. Saying things or speaking out or whatnot was always put down in your family. You can build up these old functions and say, it's not okay for me to speak my truth. I'll just always be out of control so these other people can do things for me because I'm not good enough. All sorts of things start to show up when you start to look back behind you. So as you're all sitting here, turning around to look behind you, you're welcome to actually journal through this session. What's coming up? I mean, that's the part of working with somebody like myself, and this is why I kind of read that Rumi poem about sitting in the boiling pot. It's like the water starts boiling the chickpea, to help it start to soften and start to open itself up to those different flavors within you. So this is a space where things may start to come up for you, and I encourage you to use that. For those of you who have looked at the shadow, it's interesting how actually we'll go through different layers, because really it's kind of like different doorways to different things. So you may have worked through different levels of fear, which are hiding different levels of anger, which are hiding different levels of shame. You kind of go down this path. And then there are certain points where we get to some of these more beautiful aspects of ourselves. Like for me, the spiritual teaching in many respects was in my shadow. So I didn't know if I was good enough or if I was just going to be coming from a place of ego. All the stuff I could kind of see about myself, there was really nobody in my life that could really say, yeah, that's true, I did eventually have one friend, and it was kind of after I made the decision, but it just gave me that little extra nudge to go the next step, who did a psychic session with me and reflected back what I already knew about myself and helped me kind of see that shadow that I couldn't really truly grapple with. And once I saw that, it was like a part of me said, okay, right, this isn't just an ego thing. And so this is another place where teachers, healers, intuitive friends you may have can be really valuable. And so asking for feedback, and I wrote this in a blog 2 years ago. It's hard to believe, but 2 years ago, about ways to look at your shadows, to ask friends. And also look at your friends, the people that are in your life. The people who upset you the most are usually showing you an aspect of your shadow. So the boss is putting you down. You look at that, it's like, well, is it because I put myself down? I don't really believe in myself, and so I need this person to reflect that to me. Is this about me standing in my own power? And so this person is reflecting back my need to speak up, to leave. So as you can journal through this of what you know, take the next steps and to ask different people in your life if you really want to start to come into your shadow to understand what you're hiding from. And as I've kind of alluded to, it really is both the light and the dark. So finding out what are you really talented at that you may not even acknowledge in yourself. Because what's interesting about this is the things we tend to be most naturally good at are the things that we most naturally overlook. Or because in a lot of our egos, we've been taught that being good at something means you need to work really hard at it, or you have to have a lot of struggle, or in some way have earned it, because we have this really focused society on earning things. That to have something sort of naturally come forth from you, be a natural listener, naturally intuitive, naturally good writer, whatever it is, it may just come out of you so effortlessly, and so you may not even realize what you're sharing. I mean, and I get that reflection a lot from my teaching, because people, share these wonderful compliments. It's wonderful, but at times it's like people are just complimenting me for breathing air. It's like it's just such a joy to share in like these webinars and the blogs and the videos. I just have so much that I want to share that I have to pace myself. I'm always telling people I have like a whole bunch of sticky notes here on the right-hand side with like different ideas for videos and webinars and whatnot. So I think this can be an encouraging part of it, right? Where the ego's like, oh my God, I'm going to go look back there. I'm going to be a horrible human being. It's not that anyone's going to find that. I mean, if you've done something really heinous, like you killed somebody or, raped somebody or something like that, there are definitely different levels of atonement and penance that have to happen, right? So I'm just picking something really horrible and awful because the ego always kind of likes to exaggerate and act like we're somehow these terrible, terrible human beings if we look back there. We certainly will find things that require penance of different kinds, whether it's like stealing something from a friend when you were 12, right? So then you may have to like write an old letter to that person if you're in touch at all and apologize or do some level of penance to kind of re-embrace that side of you, that side that may be disingenuous, the side that may be greedy and jealous. Right? Those are other things that can hide out. But interestingly enough, there's certain levels of greed and anger that are accepted in our culture, especially for men. Men are allowed to be very angry. It's not healthy anger in any sort of way. I sometimes describe a certain level of righteous anger where you don't want to take your own crap anymore. That can be kind of good as a short term, but you don't want to get lost in it. It's too easy to get lost in some of those energies, and they can be very toxic if you're not careful. But sometimes a little bit of righteous anger will get you moving through, heavy fear, heavy shame that's kind of freezing you, so it can kind of move that energy. But yeah, there's a lot of anger and greed in plain sight, which actually isn't healthy. It's actually this strange way where the shadow is in plain sight, but it's accepted as being okay or good. Well, it's just really a driven guy who's trying to make his billions. It's like, why? And so as you look at the people around you, you're also looking, what are the nice traits of other people that are around you? Nice is a weak word, but, what are those wonderful, loving qualities they may share that reflect back to you that you start to see in all your friends? That maybe you just have a whole group of friends who are really great listeners, and that's kind of reflecting back your own ability to listen. There's a lot of different lessons that we learn from the people in our lives. This is why when I talk about the spiritual path, I tell people not to be too quick to get out of current relationships and to go find new, better ones. I'm always talking about spiritual community because I think it's good, but, kind of transitioning. So like you learn the lessons that you have currently in your life and the people who can evolve with you. This kind of goes into things I've talked about recently on my blog around developing conscious relationships. Conscious relationships assume that we're all evolving beings, and we are. But most relationships try to lock in at this one way of interacting. So what we want to do is we want to look at the current relationships and learn from them. Why do we put lessons in our lives? What does this show about ourselves? And as we learn from them, lessons complete, relationships complete, and some will start to leave your life. Others may actually evolve and grow into ways that you wouldn't have been able to see or know would be possible until you started to open up in a new way. And meanwhile, the spiritual community really is intended to go a little bit deeper, to consciously and intentionally create more space for your own inner growth. And not all spiritual communities are the same. Not everybody is using the same word for spiritual. Some people just means it's kind of like, let's hang out and talk about astrology all day, which most people aren't using in a mindful way. What they're doing is they're trying to predict their future and create new categories for everybody, including themselves. This woman at the checkout stand was talking about she's such an Aries, and it's like, she's not an Aries. That's just a set of words and ideas. It's like she is so much greater than that word and the ideas that are suggested by it. But in saying that, she kind of limits who she is and gives herself that sort of safer identity. So if she's always doing lots of things and is kind of wild and energetically out of control, what she does is she creates a shadow where, like, being in balance, being calm, being still is where she needs to go to learn. So if any of you are really into astrology, I'm not degrading it. I'm asking you to see if you can start to move beyond it. Because we do kind of have our set tendencies, and some of the astrology stuff does kind of work a little bit. But it's too easy for the ego to want to hold on to this idea and say, this is who I am. Which means I can't be these other things. Embracing the shadow starts to move us more towards the infinite possibilities of life. So it's a little bit of that yin-yang idea, light and the dark, but bringing it all together. Letting go of these definitions of this is good or this is bad. But it doesn't mean we wallow in any of it. It doesn't mean we now get lost in shame, get lost in sadness. We allow it to kind of move through as it arises. So going back to the metaphor of if your mother passes, it's very sad. You allow sadness to be present for you as you grieve, and then it goes. And you're done. It's the mindful way of taking what we knew as babies and children into adulthood. Because when you're a child, you just, you're upset, you just wail, right? And it all comes out. We don't need to, express and project everywhere like that. But we can just express and experience fully. And that's really, how we become mindful as adults, as opposed to as children, which are really just kind of mindless, right? Just kind of experiencing head on, releasing, and then moving on. But we can be mindful, and we can release fully, and we can move on. We can let go. So in the shadow, there tends to be a lot of letting go, but for that beauty in us, there's a deeper embracing. It's this wonderful dance. But they both are going on simultaneously, that we're embracing the dark too, and we're letting go of some of the lights. We're not holding on to this expression being a specific way, because we don't need to hold on, because it already is there. We're just clearing away the mud. So now we've been talking for a little bit. Breathe a little bit deeper again. See what's coming up for you. See if anything's starting to reveal itself. Giving yourself that space of silence. It just starts to naturally calm everything down. And if questions are starting to arise, feel free to type them in the chat pod, or you can just say that you have a question and would like to be unmuted, and I can unmute you. Sometimes forgotten memories will show up in the shadow. Just things we were upset about that we never fully dealt with. It can be as simple as like an ex-boyfriend or ex-girlfriend that didn't end well, or you didn't end it well, or something that comes up. Not everything has to be super difficult. It simply wants to be acknowledged. Issues of control can be part of the shadow. Those can be kind of broadside because there's so much control in our society. Right? That's what goes into creating that mask. It's a funny way where that issue is kind of a shadow issue and kind of in the forefront all at the same time. But control tends to come from fear. So that's usually what's hiding more in the shadows. Fear of being hurt. Fear of dying. Fear of being rejected, socially outcast. Fear of being in pain. Hi, Jackie. She's asking, it feels like in relationships and receiving love, there might be blocks which I have yet to open or surrender to. I have not yet hit the bottom line of it yet. Yeah, I know you worked through a lot of shadow stuff, and I honor that, Jackie. And so this is kind of a beautiful part where you just keep encouraging that subtle part of you to open even a little bit more. As I often like to describe, find those people in spiritual groups and in good company where that's an appropriate thing, but just an encouraging to open a little bit more. It's always felt just that the right person has not come along though, so I'm not sure if that's it. I mean, that's definitely a big program we have, waiting for that one true love sort of a thing. But the fullness of your love is already here, and that beautiful other, they're always just a mirror. So there's something else there to break. You've long since broken the facade, I know, in your own work, Jackie, and that's a beautiful thing. And so now you're breaking the need for another mirror to show you that you are that infinite love already. And in being that infinite love, continuing to enjoy the many different flavors of love that show up in your life. And to occasionally reach out. When you feel called that there's something there, it's like, I want to experience this flavor. So if there's any fear about reaching out, and being seen, being in that vulnerable place, and this kind of sense of being exposed, right? See if those are still playing around in the shadow, still trying to do their protective dance. A lot of the ego shadow is this sort of protection thing that we think we need to protect ourselves. And Virginia asks, when you say acknowledge, in what way? Well, acknowledge is just simply acknowledging that something exists. A lot of what's in the shadow is through denial. So that's like what creates the shadows. We deny these things. We say we can't have them, can't be them. So acknowledge and acceptance is pretty much the same term right now. I don't think I'm making a distinction there. But just saying that, I have the shadow, and this is what's in it, and to look. It always starts with looking. So we look, and then we can fully embrace it in whatever way it needs to be embraced, if at all. And then we can let go. Those are kind of the 3 steps I generally point people to. See it. If you can't see it, you can't embrace and let it go. And a lot of people try to skip that. They think somehow they can just let it all go and it's all going to be roses and cake all the time. And it's not that way. It's part of you. And you created this shadow too. So that's why we take ownership of it. From Birdie. Hi, Birdie. And she's asking, would you give me some more detailed practical ideas on how to let go? A lot of expectation we have about ourselves and how we should be. I just think you have to start by seeing where it comes from. I think that's always been helpful for me. So Birdie, looking back, so what are these expectations? What are they based on? Kind of digging underneath them first. Letting go, I feel like that just comes naturally the more absurd the expectation. So let's take a really common one. We have a lot of women here, and so one of the big social things that comes at women is you have to be pretty. Why? What does it mean to be pretty? What do looks have to do with anything? What do you get if you're pretty? What do you don't get if you're not pretty, right? Looking at those different standards, you start to break them apart. It starts to be more and more helpful to say, these are absurd. It doesn't make any sense. And then you start to see how this whole being pretty tends to be a kind of profound rejection of how you look, because certain things don't look right, because you're supposed to be blonde, because blondes are liked more, or you're supposed to have blue eyes, or you're supposed to be thin, or you're supposed to have big boobs, or blah, 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 blah. That to me is usually where you start, because in showing the absurdity, it just, for most of us, becomes more and more natural to let it go. And then you kind of step along from there, right? There'll be habits you let go of. Certain people, once they get on the spiritual path, they stop wearing makeup, because it's just like, well, I'm wasting, not to mention how much money goes into the beauty industry, which is just appalling. And all the clothing women think they have to keep buying to stay fashionable, to stay pretty, right? All these different layers and rules that are built on, all the ridiculous exercise regimes that are going on, like trying to get the yoga body now, right? Which is denuded yoga of the beauty of what it is, which is this wonderful practice to help us align our bodies and our minds and our spirits and our hearts all together. It's now just like, how can I do like 50 more down dogs so I can have a tight ass? This, to me, helps to break apart some of these things, helps naturally bring you towards letting go. Hi, Petra. Great to have you for the first time. When does one stop being a seeker? When you realize there's nothing to seek. And then you become a finder. And the thing about that is there tends to be a new process that arises on its own. The seeker looks externally. The finder looks internally. And it's fundamentally different. So there's plenty of people who be spiritual seekers for 30 years of their life, and they'll realize after 30 years of meditation and sitting with all these teachers and trying all these techniques that they're still exactly where they were before. And at the deepest level, that's always true. But in turning inwards to finally say, you know what, none of this has my truth, and my truth is inside, a new process arises. And that new process generally takes you towards the shadow and towards embracing all these things and dealing with any sort of issues you haven't dealt with. This is also a time, usually, when somebody really, truly, sincerely turns inwards. This is when like a spiritual teacher like me can suddenly show up in their life. I have plenty of seekers come and talk to me, but a lot of those don't really last in the work that I do, because I'm not trying to give people a new spiritual high. And that's the spiritual seeker in some respects is always kind of running away from himself. So when you no longer want to run away or avoid, that seeking kind of starts to subside. Now, I do make a difference in like this. There is that general aspiration to learn, to understand yourself. But that to me is more of being that spiritual finder. To say, I want to see and know and accept the whole of me. It's very different than I want to be an enlightened guru, because most people don't even know what that means. So this is, for you, Petra, I would say, looking at what you think you want, what you think you're trying to get, what you don't want, right? These are all going to show you where the shadow is, what you may be trying to avoid, and see what you're up to. I lost the thread, Jackie. I'm sorry. So what don't you feel is going on so much right now? Desire and sexual interest can get turned off. It's like we'll be working on a different issue, and that stuff kind of shuts down. As you drop into yourself, that stuff can come back. Like it really was pretty much turned off for me for the last year. It's only recently kind of been clicked back on inside me. And I just don't worry about that too much. It just kind of depends on what's moving for you, Jackie, if there's any blockages down there, if there's any other issues that are hanging out to otherwise deny that space, because that space has been heavily denied in our culture. The female body has been heavily denied, because it's seen as a sexual image, and yet that sexuality is denied and repressed. So, I mean, those things can be running around. I'm not really feeling very strongly for you as I'm saying it. I'm just kind of saying more for the rest of the group. But, it's there. And it can be cultivated again if you're too concerned about it. So this is where in my blog I've talked about spiritual sexuality. So if you look up understanding spiritual sexuality and you feel like, you want to kind of recharge that energy, which can be good. I mean, after we go through these deep inner shifts, that sort of recharging can be really, really nourishing and supportive. That can help. And then, of course, you have to remember that how we were sexually interested in people before was very karmic. So we're just getting really drawn to the people we had big lessons to learn from. And I know in my last couple of years, I've gotten like more and more careful about that charge, that whenever somebody really pulls on me like this, I start to tend to think this isn't attraction anymore. This is a karmic lesson. And so to be mindful of the person I'm getting attracted to in that particular way. And to learn the lesson that I feel like is coming up. And so it makes genuine sexual interest is very different than what we're used to calling sexual attraction and desire. Because it doesn't need to make any sort of goal happen. It's just there. And so if that's there for the other person and you share, then that's fine. If you don't have that deep sexual connection or romantic connection, then that's fine too. This just is so different from how I know most of you have been taught, and I probably should talk about this. Actually, I'm going to write that down. We're going to be talking about, in a couple of weeks from now, we're going to be talking about sexual desire and issues. Thank you for the question. Well, as far as repressions and blocks, Jackie, this would be specific if I was talking to you, so that would be more for a session. That's something you can definitely look into inside yourself. In Virginia, turning inwards is a bit of a labyrinth, though. No, it's not. It's just there's a part of you really doesn't want to do it. And so it's trying to complicate the whole thing. And this also goes back to the ideas you have about what you think you are, what you think you'll find, and what you think you want. So all these types of things are important to really look into for yourself, Virginia. Welcome, Ingrid. We're about 40 minutes in. So we're at the Q&A part, and I've been talking for a while. Yeah, I mean, Bertie, this is a great question. I'm glad it is being asked, because I want you to ask what is being confused, or what's confusing about it, to go inside. Because usually what's happening is there's this other party who's running as, I want this thing to be a certain way. And when it's not being a certain way, it starts to fight. It starts to say, no, I want to feel good, or I don't want to deal with those issues, or I want it to work out a certain way, or I want it to look a certain way, or I want gold stars of approval for each level that I've completed. It's interesting to start to look at the rules we're setting up already on the spiritual path. This is really, really important, because it will create a shadow to the spiritual path. And this kind of goes back to the seeker. And so this is all wonderful. It's tying in, right? So Petra asked about, do you ever stop being a seeker? And the seeker creates a shadow, because it's usually looking away from ourselves as opposed to looking inwards. And so that creates this backdrop of our own shadow of what we're kind of avoiding, what we're not embracing in ourselves. And this, of course, is the way I'm using the word seeker. So if somebody else that you're reading is talking about spiritual seekers, you may want to question them to see how they're talking about it. But anytime you're trying to get something from the external world, or just get a feeling from yourself, you're in that seeking mode, as opposed to being in that finding mode, which is to allow things as they are. And when you allow and you relax, things can grow. Anytime a struggle starts to come up, pay attention. Who is struggling? What are you trying to get? Because the ego always seems to be in this obtain and protect modes. It's like, what can I get, and how do I protect myself? Thank you for the questions. Other questions people have? Anybody who hasn't had a chance to ask yet? You're welcome, Bertie. It's good to see you again. Well, see your name anyway. Hi, Grace. Apart from acknowledging the hot, muddy mess I am in, oh good, my mom was listening and wanted to know what the weather like in San Francisco. Well, I don't live in San Francisco, and San Francisco is its own microclimate. So I'm about 30 miles from it, and so where I am is rather beautiful. We're in like the 50s, I think. San Francisco is always like gray, 55 year round. Well, and for Grace, because she's one of my regular students, I know a little bit more. It really isn't about getting lost in the muddy mess, and that's a really big important part, right? So this is that deftness of embracing this shadow side that we create for ourselves. It's like, okay, so I've not allowed myself to have these emotions, and I've not allowed myself to face myself, the big issues that are back there. I've been busy running around the world and enjoying all these other different things, which is fine, but it has its role, because in that way we kind of exhaust our interest in the world. Right, so this is kind of the reverse way. It's the longer way of going with it. So you go without until you're so sick of going without and circling around the truth, which is inside you, that you come back home. And when you come back home, it's never exactly what people thought it was. I mean, this is where the spiritual path gets very real. And this is where it's to blow up all these other ideas that people have, that maybe we're always supposed to feel good about ourselves. Right? It goes back to that we think we should all be positive all the time. Whatever that means. As I said before, that just that nature of trying to be positive all the time creates a huge shadow, because you have to evaluate and judge everything as this is positive and this is negative. Allison, you have a question? I don't know why I have a feeling to ask you, but I do. You're welcome, Grace. And other questions people have, you're welcome. Welcome to ask. Carrie, take a few more deep breaths for me. See if you can melt a little bit more inside yourself. And enjoy any silence or softness that you may be feeling, as well as accepting any noise or thoughts that may be rummaging around. Silence is always the backdrop. It's always there. That's why you'll notice that I get quiet at times. This was pointed out to me in a conversation last night. And I do it intentionally. And because energetically, there's always that movement that's going on with all of us, and I know that that's there. And because of how I am and how I share and how I've learned to acknowledge my light as an energetic being that shares in deep ways, I more fully embody it and more fully share it, and so it connects to each of you. Things move. We don't have to try. Hi, John. In terms of the concept of the inner labyrinth, it seems overwhelming at times. Like we begin looking at one problem and blows up into about a very large number of different aspects. Well, and some of that too, John, is because we haven't been looking. Right, so the untended home that we've been avoiding for most of our lives, has gotten messy. The sink's overflowing. There are cockroaches, termites in the walls. Right, so the first time you come home tends to be a huge effing mess, and we're just like, oh my God, I don't want to deal with this. But it's just you. It really is. It's just you. And you can't be scared to deal with yourself. And so you sit down and you meditate. And you take it one little piece at a time as it comes. And of course, this is why I talk about counselors and psychologists and healers and teachers and yada, 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 because they can help you to focus on one little piece at a time. I mean, I'm very intuitive, so I usually know, like, all this different stuff that's going on for something. I don't want to say all, but a lot of different things. But I rarely, bring all that to light because it's too overwhelming for a student. You want to bring yourself to the first door. And so that's what the journal is for, is start to see, like, what's the first thing that really is kind of feeling true, feeling pressing. And it's usually the thing that's going to make you the most uncomfortable at first. You don't always have to go for the most uncomfortable, but this can be a good one. I think for you, John, you've got enough awareness, you've had enough practice with this space, and I think you know yourself enough that you can go after an issue that's really present and prominent for you right now and practice opening that door to see what's there. Hi, Pedro. You're welcome, John. Is there a difference between being positive in affirmations like I am love, I'm light, I'm wisdom? I like affirmations as a way to just kind of focus the mind into a different way, not to get lost in the meaning. So to me, it's no different than any sort of mantra. You can say Om Namah Shivaya or I'm light, and to me that's the same, especially when I'm thinking of meditation. So you're sitting there, it gives your mind something to focus on to help break down the old pattern instead of running around like this, right? In the old fearful ways and the way you've been taught. So where it gets tricky when I'm talking about creating that sort of shadow side is where you have to be this idea of love. If you're not an idea, and because your ideas around what love looks like are usually pretty incomplete. So sometimes being very verbally loud and authoritative doesn't seem like you're being positive, but it may be what's necessary in a given moment. So it's really just not getting hooked on the ideas. We're all beings of light. That's more of a statement as opposed to something you have to strive for. There's nothing to be striven for. There's nothing to achieve. Hi, Allison. Been doing lots of shadow work this year. Yeah, I think that's why I called on you. It's hard, intense at times. It's okay to cry, I've learned. After each layer comes off, there's a weight lifted. Yeah. Part of the multiple layers of healing. I wrote about that on the blog some time ago. Probably a good one to pull up and drop into the old chat pod for everybody, if you haven't read this one. So that's down there now. Right, and so I like how you said it's okay to cry, right? Because that's how we create these shadows, right? There's a part of you, there's an old story said, Allison could not cry. And because you could not cry, you couldn't move through certain levels of grief. And so this is why a lot of times after awakening, a lot of us end up into the really disgusting parts, the really uncomfortable parts of ourselves, is because we haven't acknowledged any of that. So whenever we had a good feeling, a fun feeling, we acknowledged it, felt it, and it went away. So we've been using all those tokens while collecting all these other tokens of shame and anger and guilt and fear and sadness, right? And so they piled up. We haven't used those tokens yet. So we have to play those video games for a while. And then, it brings up other stuff. Hi, Michelle. I'm realizing that issues can have layers. Sometimes it's difficult to match certain things I resist with a particular issue. Keep going within. In doing this work, it produces difficulties in our home lives. Well, that sounds kind of personal, so I'm not going to speak to that too much, Virginia, because it's a complicated thing depending on how you're interpreting the work that you think you need to do and what you're bringing into your home life, and I don't know what your home life is like. I don't particularly feel like intuiting it right now either, so. Really, all I can say is just being humble with yourself and with the others and having no expectations of others liking the work that you do, as well as not trying to force your opinions or way of living on another. We're coming towards the end. A couple more questions. Right, and the shadow is never bad. You'll notice I haven't been calling it evil or wrong or any of these types of things. It's all in the language of the ego. You're welcome, Virginia. It's just what is. And so we never really get rid of a shadow because it still kind of has our blind spots in it. And so this is why I continue working on refinement. But after a while, you do kind of know what's back there. And you kind of get a sense of the flavors of when it's kicking up and you're starting to respond from it, or you're trying to do something on that level. And that's a very empowering thing. This is part of knowledge of oneself, and that's self-discovery. In knowing ourselves in that way, it's a lot easier to not set up our own traps. If we have a lot of fear around relationships and intimacy, if we know that, then next time we start to have those fears coming up as we're getting closer to someone, we can say, I know this is my shadow, right? I haven't allowed myself to let go of control and to be really vulnerable, right? You start to find other things. And in so doing, then you can actually drop more deeply into this new wonderful relationship. Especially for some of you who are very energetically open or moving stuff, that will create a lot of pressure internally on any issues you have when you get close to someone, as well as putting pressure on their issues. Things come up. And so because a lot of the old ego is thinking that being uncomfortable is not what should be in a romantic relationship, or most relationships, it generally tends to want to run or say something's wrong, as opposed to leaning in. And so these are subtle levels of discomfort, where like the energy is just kind of vibrating. We're not talking about emotional or intellectual abuse, and certainly not physical abuse. And that's never really okay. Yeah, Jackie, anything's possible. She's asking if it could be possible just to be uninterested in sexual expression, period. Yeah. But some people will be kind of asexual after awakening. It just won't be a thing. But, it really, that doesn't come from a space of denial. It doesn't come from a space of that ascetic that has run around a lot of spiritual paths. So I always like to question it first because, having that open, moving, sexual, orgasmic energy is very nourishing, very supportive in your own space. And so that's where the whole understanding spiritual sexuality is going when I talk about it for the most part. Partnering is really, to me, tertiary. It's beautiful. It's fun. We all like that. But really going within, understanding your own energy and your own orgasmic energy, it's a whole other thing. And so being nourished by that is just a wonderfully supportive space. It's another way we find that we truly have all the love and joy within us. Virginia just means not interested in sex, generally, as opposed to repressing it in any sort of way. So, and we are almost to the end. So, I'm going to do my usual closing that most of you know about. I've got my latest blog up. Right now, I've still got it open to the multiple layers of healing. And of course, as you know, if you'd like to support me, over on the right-hand side, we've got the free newsletter. We've got the being able to receive blogs to your inbox. Whenever somebody posts, you get like a little email reminder. And you can donate to the blog. And your donations mean a lot and help me a lot. And thank you to all those of you who have donated in the past. It's wonderful, wonderfully supportive, because I'm gradually moving into the space where, or at least moving towards, where I can just be a spiritual teacher and not split it up with freelance writing. So I'm very grateful for all of that. So thanks everybody for coming. It's a pleasure. I'm sending you lots of love. Embrace the shadow. There's nothing scary there. It's just you.